From Jon Jones being caught with illicit substances to Josh Barnett using performance-enhancing drugs to win a fight, here are the UFC fighters with the worst drug pasts. Starting with the greatest UFC fighter of all time, Jon Jones. The heavyweight title challenger is well known for his striking and submission skills, but he definitely has a checkered past. His first incident with drugs took place in early 2015, which was only a few days after he beat his longtime rival, Daniel Cormier, at UFC 281. The NSAC discovered that Jon had failed a pre-fight drug test, which had tested for benzalkonium, a component commonly found in cocaine. Now, this drug isn't really banned out of competition by WADA, so NSAC couldn't suspend the MMA star, and he was able to take part in a light heavyweight title fight against Daniel. But after this news broke out, he apologized publicly and told his fans that he decided to go to rehab for his cocaine use. He insisted that he didn't use the drug frequently, but has since boasted about beating Daniel after using the substance before their rematch in 2017. On Joe Rogan's podcast, the Troubled Athlete also admitted to getting blackout drunk a week before every fight. Jon's history with drugs didn't just stop there. No, there was also the UFC 200 debacle. The American mixed martial artist was supposed to headline the show in July of 2016, where he was all set to fight Daniel Cormier once again. This was going to be an ultra-thrilling match, as Daniel was the undisputed champion at the time and Jon held the interim title. However, just 3 days before the fight took place, Jon was forced out because he failed yet another pre-fight drug test. And this time, he tested positive for not just one, but 2 banned substances. Both the substances were used to boost his athletic performance, though the American fighter decided to maintain his innocence throughout the investigation. He claimed he was a victim of a contaminated batch of tadalafil, which is a drug used to treat erectile dysfunction. The UFC's anti-doping agency ruled that Jones didn't take the substance intentionally, and he was handed a 1-year suspension. Jones spent a year away from the octagon and returned at UFC 214 the next year, where he knocked out Cormier and reclaimed the light heavyweight title. Only like 3 weeks after the win, the UFC superstar was once again caught up in a drugs controversy. He got flagged for using the anabolic steroid turinabol. He was stripped of his belt for the 3rd time. And despite losing the fight, Cormier was crowned the undisputed champion once again. Jon, on the other hand, maintained his innocence once more and walked away from the scandal with a deal. Still, it left a stain on his reputation as one of the UFC's greatest fighters of all time. But he's hardly the only fighter whose legacy has been marked with a bad drug habit. There's also Nick Diaz. The Stockton MMA fighter is an active user of medicinal marijuana and had stated on more than one occasion that fighting interrupts his marijuana usage. His first drug test failure happened at the peak of his career. It was at Pride 33, when he defeated the former lightweight champ Takanori Gami using his Brazilian jiu-jitsu skills. It was such an epic performance that many believed that the UFC would come and re-sign Nick immediately. And then, things turned for the worst. His test results came back and his THC levels were off the charts. His legendary win was changed to a no contest, and he was stamped with a $3,000 fine. Yikes, that doesn't sound good. But that wasn't his only offense. A good few years later, he fought Carlos Condit at UFC 143 for the interim welterweight crown. Unfortunately, he once again failed his pre-fight drug test, and the fight was overturned to a no contest. He was suspended for a year too, much like Chael Sonnen. The American grappling expert had a pretty bad year back in 2010. He dominated the UFC middleweight title holder, Anderson Silva, for 23 minutes straight, but ended up losing the fight via a triangle choke submission. This loss derailed his ambitions of holding the title, and many began to doubt his ability to perform under pressure. As if that wasn't bad enough, his post-fight drug test was also positive for high levels of testosterone. In the clownery that followed, Chael made up a bunch of excuses before finally bringing his doctor to the CSAC, where they discussed his need for testosterone replacement therapy. The CSAC did end up suspending the American fighter for a year, during which he was unable to coach the 14th season of The Ultimate Fighter with Michael Bisping. That's too bad, but he should have thought about it before taking drugs to boost his performance. Although Chael failed his drug test with much more significant numbers, it was Nate Marquardt who was made an example of for having high levels of testosterone in his system. Nate was a longtime middleweight champion. In order to prep for his debut in the welterweight division, he was using testosterone replacement therapy. Unfortunately, on the day of the weigh-in, Nate's testosterone levels weren't within the acceptable range, and he was banned from competing. The UFC president, Dana White, was so disgusted by Marquardt using a prohibited substance that he fired him on the spot. Whoa. The Great was thrown off the scene for over a year, after which he joined Strikeforce and won the promotion's welterweight crown. Since his release from the UFC, Nate has a 1-2 record and isn't really considered a top contender anymore. That sucks for him, to be honest. Not more than it sucks for Josh Barnett, who tested positive for prohibited substances one too many times himself. When it comes to performance-enhancing drugs, no one in the game is more familiar with them than Josh Barnett. The American MMA fighter has been caught using PEDs at least thrice, and he may well be the main person responsible for commission testing. In the early days, using performance-enhancing drugs wasn't exactly banned in mixed martial arts. But to better understand just how widely these substances were used, the NSAC decided to test fighters. Since it was only for research and discovery reasons, there was going to be no penalty if you tested positive. And you guessed it, Josh's results came back positive for performance-enhancing drugs. He racked up the biggest win of his career by defeating heavyweight champion Randy Couture. But this was a short title reign, as Josh's results came back positive for PEDs. At that time, the American fighter believed that the UFC was setting him up, and put the blame of his failure on the promotion. A couple of years later, he once again tested positive for a banned substance, which led to him being stripped of the heavyweight title in the Affliction promotion. Fast forward a few more years, and the same thing happened again. This time, Josh was scheduled to fight Andrei Arlovski at UFC Fight Night 93, which was to take place in Germany. Before the show came around, though, the US Anti-Doping Agency informed Josh that he'd tested positive yet again for a banned substance in an out-of-competition drug test. The substance found in his system was ostarine, which is a selective androgen receptor modulator, used commonly to enhance athleticism and performance. As a result of this test by the USADA, Josh was pulled from the fight and faced a potential suspension from the UFC. He claimed to not knowingly take any banned substances, but did say that he was using legal supplements. It didn't really work out for him, though. The USADA ended up suspending Barnett for 2 years, which effectively ended his career in the UFC. Ouch. Anyway, that's everything on UFC fighters with the worst drug pasts.